Well, hi, everybody. I would like to welcome everybody to tonight's live stream. My name is Joanne, and tonight I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Chuck Swindoll Jr., a thinker, researcher, and a truth seeker whose work is dedicated to dispelling both religious and worldly illusions through psychology, philosophy, and a raw transparency. I first came across Chuck's YouTube channel in mid-2024, where I watched his video titled The Khazarian Mafia, The God Eaters. I was immediately captured by his research and presentation. That led me down the rabbit hole of his content, where I found his Christianity playlist and his audiobook, Elucidating Christianity. And at that point, I knew that Chuck had similar experiences regarding our Christian understanding, which led me to reach out to him to have this conversation. So before we dive in, I want to start by saying that Chuck and I are just normal people who have walked a journey through Christianity. And tonight, we're here to share that our journey has brought us so far. We're not here to tell anyone what to believe, just to have an open, honest discussion about our experiences and insights that we've gained along the way. So grab a seat, get comfy, and let's welcome Chuck.
Hey.
Hi, Chuck.
Hey, how's it going? Thank you.
Welcome to our live tonight. I am so thrilled to have you here. And I know a few people are looking forward to us having this conversation. So thank you for saying yes to my invite.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it.
Right, great. So for those who are not familiar with who you are and the work that you've done, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and, yeah.
Sure thing.
Yeah.
Sure thing. So here's a bit of background. Let's see, where should I start? Well, when I was 4 years old, I became a Christian. I was raised in a Christian family. My father is a very powerful man in the Christian world. He has the same name as me, so oftentimes we're confused. But I was raised in a very conservative Christian family, very normal, you could say. I was raised in religion, went to church every single Sunday growing up, went to Wednesday Night Mania, went to Tuesday Night Group, was a part of core groups, went to church camps every summer and all of that kind of thing. And it really wasn't a negative experience for me. It was just the way I was raised. I didn't have a bunch of nasty things happen to me. I didn't have any issues with the church. There wasn't any kind of thing there. I just was doing the normal routines that you do as a kid, which is following in the institutions that your parents have subscribed. And this is very normal in the way that kids are raised. We become like our parents because our parents raise us just like they are. And why would they raise us any differently?
Right.
And so I grew up in that reality, which is a very small bubble. I came to find out later, but I grew up in that reality. And I thought that basically the whole world should be Christians. I thought that, the role of the Christian is to basically be a light unto the world and to share the quote unquote truth of Jesus with everyone and to save everyone, since every Christian believes that every single person is a sinner. And so this is how I was raised, this is how I understood people and psychology and this kind of thing. It all stemmed off of the truth, which was Christianity as I grew up. And this really continued all the way through marriage. I got married when I was 22, and I'm still married to my wife, love her dearly, Jenny. And we were high school sweethearts, and we really grew up in Christianity together thereafter we met. She was 16, I was 17 when we met. And we both were Christians, and we did that routine. We were raised, we got married in the church. My father actually married us. And I was just living that routine. And then it was 1998, my father invited me to come and join him at a church he was starting in Frisco, Texas. I was near Nashville, Tennessee. We were in Franklin to be pinpoint. And so we were there for about 5 years, and Dad asked me to come out and be the engineer. His ministry is Insight for Living, and they have to have super exceptional recordings and engineering because this is the bread and butter. My father's sermons, back when he was preaching, he's retired now, but my father's sermons were the bread and butter for Insight for Living. So it was very important that they get good recordings, that everything's engineered well, and that there's no issues, because this is the lifeblood of his ministry. It's a nonprofit organization, Christian organization that's worldwide. They reach about half the world's population in about 16 different languages. So it's a big deal. And so he needed good engineering. He needed a solid individual who understood technology and science, this kind of a thing, to be a part of the team. And so I took the job. I was a young parent at the time. My daughter Jessica was about a year old. My son Noah was about 3 or 4. This was in 98, November of 98, and we packed up and moved to Frisco, where I served alongside my father in the church, in ministry, in a leadership role for about 15 years.
Wow.
And we got along fabulously. My father and I never had a crossword with each other. We really got along and still get along great. But at the end of that tenure, about year 13, I contracted cancer. And this completely upended my world, completely changed everything. Oftentimes, for a person to break out of their ontological perspective, they have to have a crisis, because that's the
Mm,
only thing that's going to break them down enough psychologically to open up to new ideas, to open
mm,
up to new concepts. That's why people have often an epiphany when they're saying a car accident, or
mm,
like me, get terribly sick and almost die, or have a child pass away, or lose a spouse in an accident. These kind of things, these crises, are what break the mind, because the world that you were living in that met
mhm,
catastrophe, a lot of people are like, I don't want to be in that world anymore. I want to live differently. I want to change my life. I don't want to get sick again. I don't want to be in a position again where I harm someone or someone harms me. You know, you're going to do something to change the path that you're on. And the only thing that's going to cause you to do that is this crisis, is this point whereby everything dissolves away. It's the tower card in tarot.
yeah.
And so in that moment for me was cancer. And because I didn't follow the normal protocol and I went the
Mm,
opposite. I rejected all Western pharma. I rejected all chemotherapy. I rejected all the doctors. I said, I don't want to have any part of anything you guys are doing, because I've seen what you guys do to people with chemo, and I
right.
see what you guys do to people with SSRIs and pharma. And I did not want to be in an institution that does
Mm,
that to people. And
mm,
so this then created a huge chasm between me and my father, because my father is obedient. My father follows the
wow.
rules. My father
Mm.
bows to authority, because that's the way my father grew up, and that's the way he understands the world, and that's okay. But that's
Romans
that's his
13.
motives. Yeah. So when he gets sick, he goes to the doctor and he does what the doctor says, right? It's
Right,
the same thing
right,
as a person when they have a spiritual issue and they're a Christian, they go to the pastor and they follow the pastor's advice, because they don't
right.
see themselves as an authority. They see themselves as subservient spiritually, subservient medically, and
Yes.
so they'll buy into these systems that these institutions have established. And so
Mhm.
when I got cancer, there was a protocol that people. I had the same cancer as Lance Armstrong. Armstrong. I had testicular cancer, and typically you got about 8 months before it moves into your lymphatics, moves into your lungs, moves into your brain, and kills you. That's why Lance, when he waited a long time before he was treated, he started to get brain cancer. He started to have lung issues. I mean, it was moving into his system, and it's a very aggressive cancer, testicular cancer. It'll stay there in the testicle for a while, but it eventually will move out through the lymphatics.
Right.
And so when I told my dad that I was not going to be adhering to the Western system and I was not going to be doing anything the doctors told me to do, this enraged him.
Wow.
He was
Really?
very, very upset with me about that. And so that then began a very deep chasm, a severing of our relationship that was unexpected. I didn't expect it, and I didn't see it
No.
coming.
No, because you had just shared that you had never had a fight with him. You've been working
Yeah,
with him for 13 years. Obviously, you're his son. So now all of a sudden you have this thing coming up, and now he's opposing you significantly.
yeah. And we had a couple of very serious talks, and it never ended well. It did not go well. And it really was the beginning of the end of our closeness. We certainly love each other. I love my father very much, and he loves me. I don't have any doubt about that.
Right.
But this was really the beginning of the end of our having a real close relationship. And I didn't expect that. I didn't think that was coming.
Well, belief
And
systems are
so,
now changing, right? You're starting to see now you're coming face to face with a life choice, and you're seeing that if I choose this, this is the outcome that I'm going to get, and I don't want that.
yeah,
So this is what he's
yeah,
expecting of you. So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's quite
And
the thing.
he though he disagreed with me, he didn't get in my way. You know, he supported me, loved me, you know, obviously he wants me to get better. He obviously wants me to heal. I mean, that, you know, that was never an issue. But the way I was going about it just really rubbed him the wrong way. And so, in the midst of all this, in the midst of all this crisis, I began listening to lectures from a gentleman named Joseph Campbell. And Joe has an incredible series called Mythos, Mythos. You can rent it on Netflix. You can get it from Amazon on DVD. And that set of lectures changed my life. I remember I was journaling. I had a hard time sleeping because I was in so much pain all the time. And I remember I would start journaling while I would listen to his lectures, and I filled a book of information, and I couldn't write fast enough because his ontology, his existential understanding was so radically different than mine because Joe's really a left-hand path guy, not in the satanic sense. Please
Right,
understand,
right.
not in the satanic left-hand path, not in that sense, but in a left-hand path sense of he's a guy that didn't follow the rules. He didn't follow the protocols. He lived his
Mm,
whole life learning differently. He spent his whole life understanding and building a concept of the world that was based in his reading and literature rather than a professor at a college. And so Joe had an entirely different approach to the world that was based in poetry, that was based in understanding the world from these artists who had written all of these books about the world, about sociology, about the different cultures. And so his approach was so different than the dogmatic, religious, monotheistic understanding that I had grown up in. And he was this totally different radical individual, but he looked conservative. He looked like a guy in a suit. But he had this very open mind. And this was an entirely different thing for me because all the wise, quote unquote, people that I had grown up around were in suits and ties, but they didn't talk like this. And this
mm,
guy was a totally different approach, and he approached the world through compassion, through love, but he wasn't an Eastern mystic. But he embraced Eastern mysticism in his basic foundation, and this is what ended up leading me to Watts, Alan Watts, who is based in Eastern medicine. And as you know, Alan Watts left the Episcopalian Church, and in the midst of this entire newfound understanding through Joe Campbell, I read this letter from Alan Watts when he left the Episcopalian Church, and I was like, holy God, this is exactly what I have been experiencing. And so I knew at that
mm,
point between Joe and Alan, I had tapped into a life force that I had never had before. And in the midst of my fighting cancer, I'm using Eastern medicine, acupuncture, meditation, the chakras, this whole thing
mm.
to invigorate my immune system and heal. And without my planning any of this, all of these things coalesced together. And I had this realization as I was healing from cancer. Oh my God, I have been living in a tiny golf ball sized world, and I have been believing things that have hindered my development spiritually. I have been adhering to tenets and edicts and dogma from minds that were 2,000 years old. And I know the minds now are much more aware than the minds from 2,000 years ago when these religions were written. And so you're
Mm,
only going to get as far as the mind that writes the religion that's being offered to you. And since those minds were 2,000 years older than ours, like in the past, I knew, well, these people must be insane because they're building a psychology that's based on 2,000-year-old dogma filled with tribal religions in Levant. And I don't want to align myself to such people. I don't think that's a good idea. This was just very practical, pragmatic thinking that I was involved in at this time. And so when I healed from cancer and I walked out of that, one of the things that you learn when you have cancer is you must leave the path that brought you to cancer, or you're
mm,
just going to get cancer again. So if you don't change course, eat differently, think differently, believe differently, act differently, if you don't change those things, you will get cancer again. Cancer cancer does not care what you think, doesn't care about your opinion. If you
mm.
don't change your ways, you will get sick again. And the reason you got sick was what you were believing, what you were eating, what you were exposing yourself to, all these things, because cancer is a disease you get from exposure. It's a toxin exposure disease, and you get it over time. That's why it's so insane right now that children are getting cancer, because cancer is like diabetes. It was a disease that people got in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. You know, it's a game ender at the end of your life because you've been so toxic in your behavior. And
Mm.
so the seeing children now getting cancer, you know there's something very wrong here with this society, because we now are getting children who are getting colorectal cancer at age 6. And
Oh,
so
wow.
it's these kinds of things that when you are tapping in and objectively looking at the world through a non-religious perspective, and you just look at the world benignly as a human being, the compassion comes out of you, because you realize there's something very, very wrong here. There's something wrong with this world when we have people getting
Mhm.
sick this young, when we have people killing each other over what they believe. Like, we literally have family members that when their child says they're gay, they abandon their child. Like, there's something wrong with a parent who does that. There's a psychology wrong there. I touch on some of that in my book. And so I began this whole psychological journey when I left Christianity in realigning myself to a new way of believing, thinking, acting, understanding, so that I never got cancer again, because I didn't ever want to get sick again. And so when I changed course, well, then that then left me at a massive crisis in my life, because I work for a church. And if I
Oh,
don't believe in Jesus anymore and I don't subscribe to the dogma anymore, well, then I'm going to be a hypocrite if I stay. And since I am absolutely not a coward, I was not going to remain a coward and be a hypocrite and continue to serve, claiming that I believe these things, which I knew harmed people. And so I couldn't stay, and so my hand was forced, because I'm the kind of guy where I don't do well living double lives, and like having, I act one way and I believe another. It just doesn't work that way for me. I'm very much like my father that way. My father is just like that. And so I was in a real crisis, and so that's when I had some very hard conversations with my father, my family, and others. And it really became apparent I wasn't going to be able to stay. And within a few months, literally within a few months, we left. And I moved to Washington State, not for their political views, but to get away from the shadow of my father, because my father's shadow is nearly worldwide. And it wasn't a rebellious thing. It wasn't like, I'm going to distance myself from you, Dad. It wasn't like that at all. It was like, I want to have my own identity. I want to have my own understanding. I don't want people to see me and say, "Oh, that's Chuck Swindoll. He's a Christian." I wanted to leave that assumption, that stereotype, and make it clear that I was thinking for myself, and that I had a few things to say in regards to this world that I left, this spiritual world, this religious world that I left. And then began all of the videos I started doing on Facebook, which is when I started doing videos on Facebook. I think it was in the mid 2000s. And
right.
I had a whole bunch of people that were writing me and were saying, "Your videos are unbelievable. I've never heard Christianity approach this way. I've never heard the psychology you're talking about when it comes
Mhm.
to religion and dogma. I want more." And
Right.
that was unexpected, because I was just simply sharing some of the things that I found out as I
Mhm.
moved out of the trimmings and trappings of Christianity. And this seemed to resonate with people. And then
Mhm.
that built and built and built. And then finally, I had like 10,000 views on Facebook. I wasn't even on YouTube yet. And I had like 10,000 views on this video I made called Lucifer and Luciferians. And I had published that on YouTube, or on Facebook. And I had people, I probably had 100 people that wrote me and said, "Please go to YouTube, because I don't have friends that are on Facebook, but if you put it
Mhm.
on YouTube, then I can send them and they can see this video." And I was
Mhm.
like, "Okay, I'll do it." And I didn't want to, because I didn't start all of this to like start a business or sell stuff or anything. I
No,
was
no.
simply just sharing my heart. I'm a very hard on the sleeve kind of guy. I'm very open. I don't embarrass easily. I don't have a problem sharing these things. And so it was just natural for me to start coming out and sharing this stuff. And so when they said I should start the YouTube thing, I did it. Actually, I did it begrudgingly, because I'm like, "Oh man, I got another social media I'm now going to have to chase after." But I did it anyways. And it was great. And I got a
Mhm.
lot of subscribers right up front. I had over 1,000 within the first month. And I was like, "Holy smokes, this is incredible. I can't believe that people like this. I can't believe that they're actually wanting to see this." I did I did a video on conflict-oriented religions, and I mean, the feedback was just incredible. And the thing that shocked me more than anything, Joanne, this was the thing that shocked me, was that as time went on, and I made more and more videos, the resistance and the negativity and the hate in the comments got less and less and less. And I realized that the reason for that was I was psychologically showing these people this is undeniable what I'm saying. I'm not presenting a theological argument to you. I'm presenting an argument of basic psychology and parenting. And you and I both know it's not a good idea to box your child into thinking just like you, assuming just like you, having the same goals just like you. That's not wise to do as a parent. But that's exactly what you do with religion. You put all this dogma into them to think just like you, to see the world just like you, to behave just like you. And any normal, or I should say, any parent who understands child psychology knows you need to provide an atmosphere for that child, for them to make their own decisions, for them to see the world and objectively think for themselves, because if they never think for themselves, they will always act like a child. And so they will always be approaching God in the sense of asking permission, seeking approval, and
Yep.
expecting reproof, which is the attitude of a slave. It's the attitude of a child. And this is the way adults think as Christians. And there, any person, any individual who has a child will understand that that is not a good idea psychologically. And I knew that when I had that, that's an inarguable point. There's no one that can come to me and say, no, actually, it's a really good idea to make your child just like you, to make them basically a bot, just like you are. That's a great idea. You totally should do that. No one in their right mind would say that. And that's what I found as I continued further and further onto this thing. I got less and less resistance, and that's when I knew I was onto something good, because these are unarguable points. Human psychology, as Jung taught, is an unarguable point. And when you make sense psychologically, people can see that. And
Mhm.
that is the way you win the heart of a Christian, is you win the heart through compassion. And compassion is the person who takes on the psychology of another so that they can understand themselves better. And that's exactly what I was doing. And I was doing that because I wanted to, and I have great compassion for people who are locked in religion, because I can shine a light to them that they've never seen before, and that is juice for me. And so, really, Joanne, that's how everything started. That's where I'm from. That's why I do these things. And that's a very long answer to your question.
No, that's perfect. You touched on so many subjects. I'm like, okay, we want to talk about this. We want to talk about that. Now, when you were in the church, you had shared about how you didn't want to be two-faced anymore because you were living like kind of like a double life. And then you said, I didn't want to participate to what I knew was starting to harm people.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that? What did you start to notice as you were exiting Christianity, or as I like to call it, churchianity? And like, what is it that you saw that you're like, okay, I can't do this?
Right. I saw that the whole premise of Christianity, the entire religion, rests on a singular foundation. And that singular foundation is that every single person must agree and believe that they are a fallen creature and that they are sinner from the moment they come out of their mother's womb. The entire thing rests on that. All of Jesus's teachings are to ameliorate that situation, because you're a fallen creature and you cannot, being a fallen creature, have access to the great throne room of God, because you have not accepted the gift of forgiveness. You have not done the religious rigmarole to account for your belief that you're a sinner. And so when I was able to crush the idea that we're all sinners, and I do that in my book and I do that in my nature series, that we're perfect creatures exactly as we are. You don't see a mistake anywhere in nature, and you're a nature creature. So there's no way you're a mistake. There's no way you're making any mistakes. You are involved in a process of becoming more and more aware, and that is a painful process, and it requires mistakes. It requires falling. It requires harm. That's what it requires to grow. And so any person who has done any kind of growth in their life, who has realized great things in their life, went through pain to realize that. And when you claim that that pain, those mistakes are sin, you're in an inescapable conundrum. You're in a double bind, Because a sinner can't be trusted, therefore a sinner can never save themselves. They must reach out like a slave for help. They must always be reaching. They must always be asking. They must always be seeking permission, asking permission, seeking approval, those kind of things, because they are a subservient. They are a fallen creature. And so I realized that is not a good idea, because when you teach a child math, let's say, you don't walk up to that child and say, hey, listen, I'm going to teach you math, but understand you will never be really good at math. You will never get over it. You will always be bad at math. You'll never fully get it. You'll always need my assistance. You'll always need accountability in order for you to do well at math. You would never do that. The first thing you do is you say to the child, you're going to do awesome at this. We're going to learn math together, and you are going to do so well, it's going to be incredible. Okay, that's the correct psychological approach. But when you approach someone and you're going to say, teach them religion, and the first thing you say is, okay, you need to understand, for understanding God, you need to understand you're a sinner. Okay, you are a fallen creature, and you will never, ever, 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 ever have a relationship with God until you believe that you're a sinner and you do what you have to do in your understanding of Jesus in order to access God. But when you wake up every morning, understand you're prone to wander. You're prone to leave the God you love, right? You sing to him. You're prone to leave these things because you're a sinner. Now, if you believe that about yourself, this is basic psychology, you believe what you become. So if you think that you're a sinner, you will act like you're a sinner. And all of us know that's basic psychology. I mean, if you think that you're fat, you will act like you're fat. If you think that you're sick, you will act like you're sick. This is basic psychology. Okay, well, I thought to myself, well, if this is the great religion of the world, to free everyone and to bring them to this incredible understanding of God, why does it start off with a psychology that's degrading, that's self-effacing, that requires religious rigmarole in order to move forward? Meaning, if I'm in a pygmy tribe in the middle of Australia and I never hear about Jesus and I die and I'm worshiping paganism, being one of these tribal creatures, well, I'm going to hell. According to Christian, I'm going to hell. I didn't accept the gift. But that person never even heard about Christ. You see, there's a rigmarole you have to go through with Christianity in order to access the Almighty. You see, this is inappropriate psychology. This is inappropriate approaches to spiritual things. This is the inappropriate approach to how you understand and recognize yourself. That's why there is an identity crisis at the center of Christianity. At the center, it is a taught identity crisis, and the identity crisis is that you're a sinner. That's a crisis. So the entire Christian mechanism is a coping mechanism to cope with the fact that you were born a sinner. And so the only way you're going to be okay is if you cope with being a sinner through Christianity. And when you begin to take Christianity apart like this and see what it's doing in brainwashing people and telling them certain aspects and characteristics about themselves in the world that they can never change, this is brainwashing. This is brainwashing. When you put someone into a mold and they can never leave that mold, that's brainwashing, because they can't think for themselves. They'll never be able to escape that mold because they can't think for themselves. So the Christian can't escape the fact that they're a sinner, so they will never be able to think outside the fact that, hey, wait a minute, what if I'm not a sinner? What if I'm actually absolutely perfect? And I approach the world from that perspective, and the fact that I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm getting better little by little as I learn through life and grow through life. Well, this is the appropriate approach for someone who is building their responsibility over life, building their awareness over life. But see, you can never do that in Christianity, because every morning when you wake up, you're a sinner. You're fallen. It doesn't matter how many times you've been forgiven. It doesn't matter. You are a sinner, just forgiven until the day you're born, and then you're clarified. Then your dirty, filthy body is thrown away, and your spiritual body finally escapes this filth you've been stuck in, so that you can know and be with God. Do you see how nutty that is? Because you never are free until you die. And you live in this imagined freedom that Christianity has given you, which is a total illusion. It's a total golf ball sized world. You see, and it was this kind of basic, this fulcrum of sin that the whole thing rests on, that caused me to rethink the whole thing and realize The reason why someone would believe that is that it was a person from 2,000 years ago with a tiny little conscience that didn't understand the perfection that they are, and they didn't understand the perfection that they were in. All of these tribes were in a conflict-oriented world. They were fighting for their lives. They were fighting to support the gods they worshiped. This is a conflict-oriented society. There's no reasoning happening here. There's no discernment happening here. These people are bots, and they are following a dogma, and they are in the tribe, and that tribe is going to go conquer the world, you see? And this is
Right.
an inappropriate approach to the world, to life, because it's based in dominator culture. And dominator culture is a culture based on greed, usurpation, bots, hate, overcoming, war. These are the characteristics of a conflict-oriented world. And see, what these people don't realize is that they are in a contrastive world. They're not in a conflictive world. These are all contrasts. Good and evil are contrasts of the same energy. And this is the hardest aspect that it will be for the Christian to integrate, because then they have to realize that God has just as much love as hate within God. Because if I hate God, how much hate am I going to sense from God? A ton, because I
Yeah.
hate. If I love God, how much sense am I going to get from God? I'm going to get a ton of love, because that's how I am approaching God, you see? And so when you approach God from this conflict-oriented idea, it's always polarized. And so therefore you're always nuts, because you're going from one side to the other, to the other, to the other. And that's why the Christian gets locked in relief, the drug relief, because they sin, and then they go to Jesus and ask forgiveness. Oh my God, I'm relieved. The sins have been taken from me. They're off my back now. And that is a drug. And this is why the Christian rededicates their life so often. It's why the Christian is based in shame, because they want to access the drug relief in order to access God, because they misinterpret relief with God's presence. And see, so this all of this stuff is self-stimulation. I call it, sorry for the term, but I call it religious masturbation, because you're just going back and doing the same things over and over and over and over again, getting the relief that you're expecting from God, because you're asking forgiveness and you're bowing to this dogma. You see, and this does not build into over time. The person
No.
stays in this adolescent psychology, this polarized, this conflict-oriented psychology their entire life. And they take this psychology they learned as a child, and they take it right into adulthood. And that's why when you approach the Christian as an adult, they act as though a child that's guarding their sandbox. They don't have any reasoning going on. They don't have any discernment, because the only way to truth is the tight and narrow way to Jesus. And you must follow this dogma, you see. That is brainwashing. You see,
Yeah.
and so this is why when you step back from these religions and from these dogmas and just objectively observe it and just look at the situation, you'll begin to see, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Wait a minute, that's what makes a fanatic. If I believe like that, I'm going to become a fanatic. And I don't want to be a fanatic. I don't want to be a person who gets triggered when someone says Jesus never lived or Jesus wasn't who he said he was. I don't want to be a fanatic and go crazy when someone believes like that, because they don't think like me. You see, and it makes people crazy when they adapt to a dogma that is so isolated in its perspective. And that's why I use the term golf ball sized world, because every religious zealot is in that. And that's why they're a zealot, because they're in a golf ball sized world.
And not only that, Chuck, they also have this book that they've been given from the very beginning. And the foundation is, okay, congratulations, you're a Christian now. Here's the book. Here are the rules that we follow. And by the way, this is the inerrant word of God. It is the way, the truth, and the life. There is no error. This is all that you need. And I remember when I was in church, I would be like, how come there's certain things missing? And I remember being told all the time, well, if you were meant to know it, God would have put it in the book.
Yeah, I heard that before.
So
yeah.
It's like, okay. So I found that there was a lot of things that I could never get answers to. But because you have this experience, and I'm sure a lot of people that become Christians have a good experience, they have a touch from God or whatever. I know that that's how I became really involved in Christianity. And as time goes on, you start to see a little bit of things that don't work out, but because you've been through this life-changing experience, you just take everything in and just thinking, okay, that's just the way that it is. And I remember so often just being told, I hated this. After a while, they kept saying, it's all about Jesus, 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 Jesus. Yeah. And I thought to myself, why am I here? Then why the need for me? If it's all about Jesus, then why is Joanne here? And I would ask that question, and I got really upset because I never understood that if the God of the universe loved me and died for me, just Jesus died for me, if it was only just about him, then after his story, everything should have been done, book closed, fini, like done.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah. Yeah, Alan Watts wrote a book called The Wisdom of Insecurity, and it ties into some of these concepts you're talking about here. The wisdom of insecurity is the thought that you're a lot better off not thinking that your destiny is pre-chosen or predetermined, because then you're free. So when I grew up in Christianity, I grew up with the idea that was placed in me, which was God had a plan for me, and he had that
mm-hmm,
plan. Notice the gender, he had a plan
mm-hmm,
for me from the moment I was conceived. The moment the sperm met the egg in my mother's womb, God had a plan for me. And so I
mm,
lived my whole life like that. And the thought was, and the way I was trained was, you just simply do your best to stay as to do as little sin as possible, right? Do the right thing, stay close to Jesus, pray, stay in God's will. And as
yeah,
long as you do the kind of thing and you stay in God's will, God's plan will unfold for you. And that you can have peace and faith knowing that. But you see, that's a very inappropriate approach because it doesn't leave any room for choice, because every choice you're making is just a choice that's in God's plan. You see, so your
exactly.
life is not your own, which touches on what you just said. So this is an emaciation that happens within the Christian in that their life is never their own. They are always in God's will and plan, and they just simply have to clean their life up enough in order to
Mm-hmm,
be in that plan enough to really realize what God has in store for them. And it's
mm-hmm,
much wiser to approach the world as an enigma. There is no plan. And when you're born, your destiny is chosen exclusively by your choices, which are entirely your free will. But there's
mm-hmm,
no plan, there's no set way for you. You are free, in other words. You are totally free to make whatever choices and decisions you want, and your destiny has not been chosen yet, has not been assumed. You are responsible. See, this puts a much more strengthening of responsibility within the individual, because their life is then their own. It's no longer Jesus's, it's no longer God's. It's their own life. And so they are responsible. And there is no plan. So if you want something, you will have to do the steps and the process to get there, because God is not going to be doing that. You are going to be doing that. And that's when I found out when I had cancer. It wasn't Jesus who was doing the coffee enemas. It wasn't Jesus that was meditating. It wasn't Jesus that was doing the yoga. It wasn't Jesus that was taking the supplements. I was doing those things. I was
mm-hmm,
fighting for my life and for my own identity, you see. And there's nothing what's the word? There's nothing haughty about that idea, because it's simply embracing the fact that I'm a free creature. I'm a free creature, and my choices are mine to make, and the future that's ahead of me is determined by the choices that I make now. And therefore I am very responsible. It's not God's responsibility to get me back in God's plan. It's not Jesus' responsibility to get me back in his fold. It's my responsibility to be a humane person, show compassion, and to shine my light to the world. That's what's going to bring me meaning. But if I'm just trying to tap into meaning from stuff that's been handed down from people before me, it's never mine. That's
that's
never
right.
my experience. I'm just
Mm-hmm,
attaching my experience to the path I've been told to take.
yeah,
But I am much better off as an individual, and I will have a much wider experience if I traverse into the forest where there is no path, where there is no way. This is how the men in the Grail approached the forest when they went out to seek the Grail. They did not follow each other. They each went their own way to find the Grail. And this is the picture, this is the metaphor of each individual walking into the forest that is nature, that is not safe, that is not guaranteed, that is not secured. And you walk into that space, that insecurity, boldly, courageously, because you know I'm a nature creature. I'm as much a tree as I am the forest, as I am the clouds. I am one with this energy. This energy is me, and I am that energy. And you walk into that forest free, unafraid, because it's a familiar place, because it is nature. So you are never alienated as long as you identify as a nature creature, because you live in a nature world. You see, there's nothing to be afraid of in that space. Whereas if I approach the world as a conflict, well, there's fear everywhere, because everything's trying to
mm-hmm,
eat me. The devil prowls about the earth looking as a lion to devour me. This is approaching the world in fear. This is approaching the world from a standpoint of, I am a slave in this place. I was put here. I'm a sinner, and I have to have God. I have to have Jesus in order to make sense. And you see, this is
That's
a
right.
fanatic. This is a person that is not centered, because they're always seeking outside themselves rather than seeking inward. And the only way you're going to find your way through nature, through the forest, is by seeking inward, because there is no path. The path is inside. That is where you will find the path, and that's up to each individual. This is why spirituality, or of course, this is why religion is such a bad idea, because every single person is going to have a different spiritual experience. And if my spiritual experience does not line up to the religiosity that is
Hmm.
surrounding me, I have a problem.
Hmm.
Whereas if I identify with nature and I identify myself as a nature creature, I'm never going to enter that crisis, because I am embedded in nature. I am embedded in a nature world. You see, and you're going to be able to make sense of life so much more clearly if you don't approach it with the idea of a plan, but you approach it with the idea of insecurity, that there is no plan, and that I am much better off. I am better off if I learn nature, if I become aware, if I learn and understand the properties of nature, the properties of the world that I am actually in, not trying to adapt a 2,000-year-old psychology into the world that I'm in, because it doesn't fit. That was a different age. Those were different people. They had different values than us. I mean, just think about humans back then. Humans had no value back then. They would go into these tribes, would go into these other tribes. They would rape all the women. They would capture the children. They would kill all the men. There was very little appreciation for life. So these people were seeking appreciation outside themselves. That's why they're seeking outside themselves for God. That's why they're
Hmm.
seeking outside themselves for dogma, because the dogma is not within. That's why these people are out of touch with nature and see nature as something to have dominion over. That's why they think that, because nature is a conflict. It's nature is something that you overcome, that you get through, that you endure. It's not something that you embed in. It's not something that you embrace passionately. You see, it's an entirely different psychology. And so that's why I filled my book so much with the understanding that we've been raised in a dominator culture, and that is inappropriate for human beings, because human beings are not oriented to dominator. They're oriented to compassion. They're
Hmm.
oriented to the heart. You are taught to hate. You are taught to see people's skin color. You are taught these ways of approaching the life through conflict, rather than approaching the life through the idea that all of these things are the same energy. These are all just expressions. I'm an expression of it. You're an expression of it. The tree is an expression of it. The clouds are an expression of this central energy that is the universe, that is all things. And this thing, this energy, can't be put into words. You can't make straight lines out of it. You can't put a religion on top of it. You can't fit it into anything anymore than you can fit nature into anything, any more than you can fit a person into anything. These things are past these ideas, whereas religion is consumed with materialism, consumed with this idea of conflict, and that I got to choose right or I'm going to go to hell. You see,
Hmm.
these are consumptive. These take away the humanness from an individual and force them into these ideas of conflict, dominator, greed, usurpation, that kind of idea. And that's why it's unhealthy. And that's why the psychology of religion breaks down. And it's easy to leave it once you realize it's doing this to you. But until you realize it's doing this to you, you'll never leave. You'll fight to stay a sinner the rest of your life.
Well, as you were just sharing that whole experience, I'm going through towards my life, and I'm going. I never realized until what you just said. Like, when you are a Christian, when you're a believer, you are told, "Here you go, and here's the goal. Here's the plan." So it's everything is taken away from you. Everything. Like, I remember just trying to get up in the morning. God, what do you want from me? And people, I remember stupid. This was so stupid. People coming up and saying, "I want to send a letter out, and I would like to pray to God what stamp I should put on the envelope." There's no choice. It's always
Yeah.
left to God. And then if you dare make the wrong decision, then you're going to pay for
Right.
it. So now you're put in a position where you don't act, because what Christianity is great to be told, just sit down and pray. Just pray. Just pray and wait. And
Yeah,
it
and
puts
it's not,
decisions
yeah.
in action.
Yeah, it's not an answer. That's what I really found. Psychology is really going to be a great answer for folks that are struggling with those kind of questions. And becoming much more objective in the spiritual aspect, in the sense of understanding that your spirituality is far beyond a religious dogma. And as long as you think spirituality is a religious dogma, well, then you're always going to be short of that
Yeah.
dogma. You're never going to add up. And like you just said, your life is never your own. And that's why when you turn your life over to claiming that you're a sinner, you right there turn over ownership of your life over to a belief system. And you see, the Christian thinks this is appropriate. They think that's what you should
Yes.
do because a sinner can't control their life. They have to have Jesus, or they're going to go out and rape people, and they're going to go murder people because they don't have Jesus. And see, this is brainwashing to assume an individual to those kind of conclusions if they don't believe correctly is
Mhm.
absolutely ludicrous. It's using threat to try to get the appropriate behavior. It's the same thing as walking up to a child and saying, if say you do that again, I'm going to hit you in the face so hard you're not going to wake up till next week. That is not going to motivate the child to behave appropriately. That's going to cause the child to be filled with fear and to
Yeah.
become reactive. They're not going to be objective in their decision of not doing what you've told them. They're just going to simply obey them. Well, they haven't learned anything. They just simply adapted to what you already told them. If you want them to actually learn something, you're going to have to let them experience the pain of doing the thing you don't want them to do. For example, let's say like your child is obsessed with scissors and they're always playing with scissors, and you tell them, listen, stop playing with scissors. You're going to cut yourself. You don't do that. And you tell them over and over and over again. They refuse to stop. So finally, you see them playing with the scissors, then you just sit right near them, knowing that, or not allowing them to hurt themselves, and they'll eventually cut their hand. And right there, they'll realize, oh my goodness, I'm going to get cut if I play with these things. They'll stop playing with them. I know it's
Mhm.
an extreme. I know it's an extreme example, but the point, you can see the point I'm making.
Yeah.
What's going to teach that child is the pain of realizing my behavior is doing this. As long as I think all the behavior I'm doing is a sin, I could just give the pain to Jesus because Jesus forgives it. Whereas when I have
Mhm.
to accept the pain and I did this, I cut myself, and it wasn't that because I was sinful, it wasn't because some oppression was over me, it was just my foolishness that did it. Well, see, then I can learn then. Now I've got a position to learn and understand, okay, it's not necessarily about obeying dad saying not to play with the scissors. It's about my self responsibility. And when dad isn't around, not taking the scissors out and cutting myself. See, this is the kind of thing that's missed. This is the psychology that's missed when you can just ask forgiveness. When you just say,
Mhm.
okay, I shouldn't have done that. That was really bad. God, please forgive me. And then you just leave that space and you never actually learn. You just are forgiven by it. It's like, okay, all good. I'm forgiven by the blood of Jesus and everything's good. And I'm going to now go out and I'm going to do better. The reason why you will not go out and do better is because you believe that you are going to do bad eventually, thinking that you're a sinner. You're in the wrong psychology. You are prone to become the very thing that you are thinking about yourself, whereas, meaning that you're a sinner. You believe
Yeah.
you're a sinner, so you're going to act like that. So,
Yeah.
in order for all of this to change, and in this great awakening for all of the Christians, the Islamic, the Jews, all these people that are tied into these religions, they're going to have to graduate from those religions. As Watts used to say, in Buddhism, there's this idea of the ferry boat, and the ferry boat is the transition in life that takes you from one reality to the next. When you get to that next reality, you don't disassemble the ferry boat, put it into boxes, and carry it with you onto the land. You leave the ferry boat behind, and that is exactly the way it is with tough experiences. You leave that experience behind and learn from what that experience taught you. So essentially, you metaphorically take the ferry boat with you because of all the knowledge you've gained from the journey of traversing the lake or the ocean, whatever you did, to cross to the other land. You're leaving the land, you're leaving the ferry boat. In other words, you are leaving these old ways and developing yourself more and more responsible
Mhm.
by abandoning these things that kept you locked down. Like if I'm in a ferry boat, how far am I getting? I'm still stuck on this little boat. I'm going to have to leave the boat in order to experience more. And this is exactly the way it is with religion. Religion puts you on a boat, and you never will leave if you are locked in thinking this is the only safe place for me. The ocean is going
Mhm.
to give me, I always have to be on this boat. And even when you're moored at land, nope, I'm not leaving the boat because the boat has always kept me safe. I'm not going on that land. It's not safe out there. Jesus isn't out there. Jesus is with me here on the boat. You see, and this is this childhood psychology that begins to come out with people when they begin to see in the Great Awakening, wait a minute, the world is larger than this religion I've always been locked inside. And
Mm.
it's the responsible person that is willing to leave that position that they've always been in to go and explore the surface of forest, go and explore the island that they have never explored before because they are willing to leave the boat. And this is the responsible approach. That's why Watch used that example. You must be willing to leave the boat that takes you to the next shore, or you're
Mhm.
stuck in the boat. You'll never develop, you'll never grow, you'll never become. You must leave. It's the same idea I started with cancer. You must leave the path that you have always been on that brought you to the space of cancer, or you're just going to get cancer again. And if you
Mhm.
never leave the boat, you will never experience a world outside that boat. You will be stuck on that boat, and people will look at you from the shore like, that dude's crazy staying on the boat. Like, why is he staying on the boat? He never leaves. And this is how clear it becomes when you're willing to leave. But until you're willing to leave, you will think the boat is the world. This is the world. The entire
Right.
world fits in this boat. And this great awakening is basically the whole world coming into the boat with me because I got it all figured out and I'm on the right boat. And
That's right.
that's unreasonable to do that kind of thing. It's irresponsible to do that kind of thing. And this is what Christians are going to face over the coming years, realizing my world does not work anymore in the world that we're entering.
Well, it's going to be a big kick in the pants for those people, because as you went through and as I went through and as most of us that
Yeah.
saw what it was, your whole life gets flipped over. Like you said earlier when we were just having a chat, like your relationships with your family changes, the people that you were like tight like this, all of a sudden you go from this to there, and it's it's not always easy to go through
No.
that.
No, conscious awareness is the most toughest lesson to learn, and it will cost you your life.
Yeah.
Just like recovering from a life-threatening disease will cost you your life fighting for it. Whether the disease kills you or not, you will be different on the other side of that disease road. And this
Mhm.
is life. This is the way that it is. And so all of us, each one of us, is going to have to take self-responsibility. We're going to have
Yeah.
to start reading outside of the lines of the news media. We're going to have to be reading outside the lines of the Bible. Where all
Hmm.
any holy book, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Quran, any holy book, you're going to have to read outside those lines and escape that world to develop. I mean, this is common sense. If I only read one book my entire life, how much do I really know? Whereas if I'm reading hundreds of books over the course of my life, how much then do I know? This is common sense. And it's the same thing with religion. How much do I really know about spirituality if I'm always defining that spirituality by one book, by one religion? How much
Yeah,
do I really know? You
but you're
don't.
told, Chuck, but you're told Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life,
Right.
and if you don't believe this, you're going straight to hell. So it's
Right.
like that person doesn't have the option because they believe they have the truth, the illusion of truth, and if they don't believe that truth, this is the outcome.
Right. It's the same. Okay. The way the Christian can escape that is it's the same hallucination, illusion that the medical industry did a couple years ago. And they said, your immune system isn't good enough. You're going to get sick and you're going to die. You have to take this vaccine. You have to take it. And if you don't take it, you're going to die. You're going to die in pain. You're going to kill other people around you. What is all this? This is threats. And
Mhm.
this is exactly what they do to the Christian. You have to believe you're a sinner. You have to get forgiven by Jesus, or you're going to hell. You're going to die and be in pain for all of eternity. It's the
Mhm.
same exact threat mechanism. And this is why the Christian thinks that, well, the entire world is Jesus. It is Jesus. And it's the same thing as the person who says, well, the entire world's medical system is the medical system, is what Dr. Fauci is telling me. Dr. Fauci knows he's an authority. And so what
Yeah.
Dr. Fauci says is the truth. And so what Paul says in the Bible is the authority because Paul is smarter than me and Paul knows. So I'm going to do exactly what Paul says. And it's the exact same thing that people are doing now with their doctors. I'm going to do exactly what the doctor says. I'm going to go and get that chemo and I'm going to do it exactly what they tell me to do. And what do they find out? It's a very different world than what they were told. But you
Mhm.
see, if they find that out after the fact, it's too late. It's like trying to find out if the cookie is poisonous by eating it. If you find that out by eating it, it's too late. And if you
Right.
wait until the day you die to start rethinking your religion and your spirituality and so forth, it's too late. You've already had your life experience. You're in the end game now. You could have had that experience earlier if you were courageous enough way back beyond that moment to be able to grow. But see that if you are if again if you are not courageous and you are not willing to leave those bounds, you're going to be stuck just like the person who thinks that Dr. Fauci is the end all when it comes to medicine. You're going to be stuck when you think that the political system in the United States is the end all when it comes to a republic. You see, if you think this way, you will never escape that space. That's why if you think you're a sinner, you will never escape that space. And if you think that you're quote unquote a Republican or Democrat and you hard believe that, you will never be able to leave that space because you have bought into that ideology. It's the same thing with spirituality. It's the same thing with medicine. It's the same thing with the foods that you eat. You have to be willing to be diverse in order to open up your world to expand. And that is the whole point of the Great Awakening, is consciousness, mind, expansion. And you cannot do that stuck in a medical belief, a religious belief, a political belief, an agricultural belief. You have to be willing to leave the playpen. I call it a playpen. I call, when folks are unwilling to live the ontology that they are in, they're in a playpen. And they're unwilling to crawl out of the playpen and discover the world for themselves. They would rather be in the world that was handed to them. And that's why they will never leave or escape that ontology, because they're too afraid to walk outside those walls. And we did not come here to be afraid. We did not come here to be locked into a belief system. That's not why you came here. We did not come here to obey. That's not why we're here. We did not come here to get in line. That's not why I came here. I did not come to the world to get in line. I didn't come here to work in a cubicle for 40
Yep.
years. That is not why I came here. People
Yep.
have to understand it in this kind of perspective, or you'll never leave. You'll be safe in the cubicle and you'll never leave the cubicle, because you'll think, I got a safe job, I got a safe retirement, and I've got everything all safe right here and I'm all good. Where are you at that point? You see how small that world is. It's like the animal that gets satisfied living in a tiny cage its whole life. That's not why that animal's here. They're here to explore, become, and experience the world. And you're the same exact way. And when you lock into a religion, a medicine, a political science, you are locking yourself into a vessel. You are locking yourself into a mental cage. And that's not healthy. Any person with common sense will know that isn't healthy. So I'm kind of saying the same thing over and over again at this point.
No, it's great because you're touching on different points, because as you're sharing that, what comes to mind, and I know that you have a couple of series on your YouTube channel that discusses the controllers, right? So, and you and I are very familiar with how this world and how it's functioning. So as you were sharing earlier, that people get stuck in Christianity, or they get stuck in a religious where they get their authority taken away from them. But that's how it is from the very beginning of birth outside of religion. You know, your parents sign you away to the government. Here you go. Here's your birth certificate. So, and then the government takes you, puts you in an institution and tells you that you have to sit down in a row for 12 years, shut up and listen, because somebody over you has more authority. They're smarter than you. So you learn that for 12 straight years. And then what happens is they teach you to have a job, not to be an entrepreneur, teach you how to have a job, so that you still have somebody over you that you have to ask permission. Can I have a week off once every, in 52 weeks in the year? Can I? It's always about asking permission in every single area of your life, your school, work, and now religion. So people are indoctrinated. This is what they know to be true. So as you're sharing about getting out, like, do I want to work in a cubicle for 40 years? Some people have no idea that that's not a life that they're supposed to have, because everybody they know does the same thing. Church, at least with a religion, if you're not caught in that, you're outside of that. But everybody in the world, not everybody, I'm exaggerating, but they're all go to school, get a job, work till you retire, and die.
Yeah, and this really gives an example of my philosophy or theory that the earth was made into a farm, and that we are all treated as farm animals. That's why they try not to allow us to make our own decisions. That's why you're ostracized when you think for yourself. That's why social media will kick you off if you start saying ideas that are outside the social norm. And this is how a farm is managed, because any of the animals that are a problem, or they're breaking the fence down, or they're causing issues, we'll just nix that animal. We're not going to keep that animal around. And it's that same mentality now in the world. And because, like you said, we've all been indoctrinated into this category type of way and understanding the world. This is a farm technique, and this separates everyone and turns them against each other, and causes disruption and misunderstanding within the farm itself. And that's intended because as long as all the cattle are fighting with each other, they're not trying to escape. They're just fighting each other. And so there's nobody expanding their consciousness. They're just fighting dogma amongst each other about who's right and who's wrong, kind of a thing. But nobody's mind is actually expanding. They're just trying to fight out battles. Again, a conflict-oriented world. And so that's why I fall under the understanding that this actually is a farm situation. That's why the medical system, the political system, the religious systems, all these systems are the way that they are, is that they are containment vehicles. They are set up so that the farm animals never think for themselves
Mm-hmm.
scientifically, never
Mm-hmm.
think for themselves medically, they never think for themselves politically, they never think for themselves religiously. We program them. And that's the way the entire world is
Mm-hmm.
run, because anyone who goes outside the lines, I mean, it's the people themselves that attack that person. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
look at what happened in my life. You're like, when you leave this religious ontology you've been in on your whole life, well, all the people you knew, all your family, all these folks that you were close to, they all either leave you or chastise you. So
Mm-hmm.
they actually do the work of the controllers, trying
Yep.
to keep you in line because you left the box. You didn't stay on the farm, and so
Mm-hmm.
they're going to go and hunt you down. And so the controllers don't even have to do anything. The cows themselves will harm each other as soon as one of them starts thinking differently. And
Yep.
you can see how psychologically crazy the situation is when you start to realize that we are on a farm. And that's why I did my God Eaters series, to help people understand this is how we've all been raised. I'm not saying I'm outside that. I've been on the in the farm with everybody else. I was raised as a farm creature just like everybody else. So I'm not saying that I'm a part. I'm not saying that I'm different than you guys. I'm just simply saying that I've become aware of a larger world than the boundaries of the farm. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking outside the box, and boxes and institutions that I was raised in, the dogma I was raised in. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm doing my part, which is what every human being needs to be doing, to shine a light outside the walls. And that's the whole point of this great awakening, is shining light outside the walls and adapting to a world that isn't under this control, that isn't a farm. And we have to start thinking not like we're farm creatures. And
That's
when
right.
people attack each other for thinking different, they're acting like a farm creature. And we have to learn as a society and individuals to start thinking outside of farm technology,
Mm-hmm.
outside of farm mentality. And
Mm-hmm.
this is what will help the society grow, is when the people themselves stop turning against each other and start turning their eyes not only upon themselves but outside the bounds, so that we all can then move outside of this farm mentality. And that's very important of what's happening right now, for sure.
Right. Well, as you were sharing that, what came to mind was I always wondered, like, as I started learning the truth and as I started to see what this was really about, and I started seeing the patterns, and pattern recognition was unbelievable, right? Because when you saw a
Right,
pattern in the church, you saw it in the government, you saw it everywhere.
right,
And
right.
I always like, why are we being lied to that degree? We must be something pretty special for that to be at
Right.
this level,
Right.
you know?
My
And
nature, yeah, my nature series really takes on that concept really well, Joanna. It really addresses that because it approaches the world from a non-religious perspective, and it approaches the world from a perspective of energy, frequency, and vibration. And
right.
as we know, Tesla was the one who said that's, if you want to understand the universe, that's the correct approach. And that's the exact approach that I exonerate in my nature series, is understanding yourself not as this evil, sinful creature, but
Right.
as a nature creature, completely balanced. You have both harm potential in you and love potential in you. And this is true for everything.
Mm.
Everything is based like that. Everything is built like that, with these potentials. And it's just simply a matter of learning to manage those potentials, because you have Bach within you. You have Hitler within you. You have these extreme potentials hidden within you, and it's simply your life choices that are going to determine how much of that mystery comes out of you as you live. And so it's really an entirely different approach, where you're not trying to align yourself to a dogma, but you're trying to reveal and understand yourself within an enigma. And that's an entirely different approach to the world, because one way you're trying to learn straight lines, and in the other way you're coalescing with curvy lines. And since the nature all of nature is composed of curviness, you see, you're going to be able to adapt to that curvy world much easier than trying to straighten it out with dogma, than trying to straighten it out with religion, because the world isn't composed of straight lines. It's the world is composed of spirals and curves. And so your thinking mentality needs to be of a similar idea, because if your mentality is set up with straight lines, this is right, this is wrong,
Mhm.
this is good, this is bad, when it's set up with straight lines like that, it's polarized and it can't adapt. It can't coalesce with the curviness that is nature and that you are. This is why the Christian is in an identity crisis, because they're trying to straighten themselves out, not realizing that they're actually very curvy. And the more curvy you allow yourself to be, the more you will be able to dance with the world as it is, because the world is not flat. It is a curvy space. And so this requires curvy understanding. And curvy understanding doesn't have absolutes. It doesn't have
Right.
things that are really solid. It's an insecure place, like I mentioned earlier with Alan Watts' book. The world is an insecure place because it's not safe, it's not guaranteed, it's not secure. And that's the way that it is. And so you also are the same way. You're not safe, you're not secure, you're not tied down. You're the same exact kind of way that the nature is that you're in. And so this is something that is learned over time. It's not something that you straighten out. It's something that you adapt to and flow with over time. And that just takes experience, pain, growth in order to adapt to that, because it's hard to bend at times. It's hard to curve in a way that you're not used to curving. And so that's a part of the responsibility of life. That's part of just growing up, is that realizing the world isn't as simple as it was told to me. The world is not as cut and dry as it was laid out in these religions. It's really not. It's actually quite insecure. And that is actually beautiful. That's the diversity that we love. That's the multitude of colors that we love, the multitude of flavors, the multitude of sights that we see. It's not all straight. It's all curvy. It's all different ways and orientations that we adapt to. So this is just kind of the philosophy that I use to make sense of a curvy world.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, and but I could just hear the Christians kind of freaking out and going, "What do you
Yeah.
mean there's no absolutes? What do you mean there's not this?
Yeah.
What do you mean?" Because I know that that's what I was looking for when I was coming out of that mentality. I was trying to look for another foundation. Now my whole life was shattered. How in the world this was all of my truth, and now you're telling me it's not? And I was
Yeah.
looking for, and I went to the other ditch, right? And of course, there's another religion. There's another
Yeah.
there's another religious thought process, because you want to make sense and you want to give value to your life. You say, I didn't just waste 20 some years believing this only to
Yeah.
be told that this
Yeah.
wasn't true. What do you mean? I've made every single life decision. How many relationships did I, like all that kind of
The
stuff.
ego is difficult. The ego is a difficult thing. And it's a difficult thing to contend. And the idea isn't to kill it. The idea is to train it. The idea is to help it learn. And this requires a fearless approach. That's why the Christian is looking for absolutes, because they're in a fearful world. They're in a
Yeah.
world that's composed of good and evil. And so they're looking for those absolutes, because that's going to be the guarantee, that's going to be the security that they can base their life on. But when you base your life on security and clutching, you base your life on anxiety, because it is the anxious person that clutches. It's the person that's willing to release that is not anxious. You see, and so this is that Eastern philosophy that will tear apart these Western dogmas, because those Western dogmas don't hold up when you begin to psychologically evaluate them, when you begin to experientially evaluate them, and you can cut down that fear. That's why the Christian doesn't leave Christianity, for the exact time reasons, egotistic reasons that you just named, because they spent 20 years figuring it out. And they finally got it figured out. They finally got the answer. They finally got their eternity secured. They got
Yes.
their now secured. They got the
Mhm.
past secured. It's like, oh yeah,
They got the
so relieved.
plan.
Oh yeah, I got all those answers. I'm so good. And this is ego. This is the ego giving you what the ego wants. Self-soothing. This whole idea of coping with an uncopable world. It feels so good to wrap this religious coat on me. Makes me nice and warm. And this is just the ego that you're feeling that's making you cold. And it's an illusion to put on a religious coat that will warm you, because it doesn't. Because as soon as you start being objective, as soon as you escape that comfort and that security, you realize the world is nothing like you assumed it to be, and that nature is not a safe space. And the courageous individual is the one that adapts to that unsafe space without securing it. And
Right.
that's the trick, because it causes anxiety when you try and secure it. And
Yeah.
so if your goal in life is to secure your eternity, secure your salvation, secure your
Mhm.
authority, right? If that's your goal in life, well, then you're always going to be anxious, just like the sinner. If you think you're a sinner, well, you're always going to be anxious about committing sin. You're going to behave like you think you are. And so there's no escape for that person until they're willing to embrace the idea of insecurity, the embrace the idea that the world is curvy, and embrace the idea that there are no absolutes, and we are to play in that field. You see,
Right.
that's an entirely different existence than a person
It's
who's looking for that absolute. You get
mhm.
it secured, and by God, you're never going to let go of that religious rope.
Mhm.
That's anxiety defined. That's
Well,
anxiety defined. The person that clings and clutches to Jesus, clings and clutches to that religion, you at that point are subscribing to an anxious life, and anxiety will fill your world. That's why you'll pray for relief. That's why you'll pray for God to help you escape. That's why you will pray for Jesus to come and save you. That's why you do those things, because you're understanding the world through a fear-oriented, conflict-oriented psychology. And so
yep.
you're locked. You are your own prisoner. You're both the warden and the prisoner because you are determined to stay a sinner and you are determined to keep the world fallen. So you are both the prisoner and the warden because you are making the world and you're also guarding it and making sure that it never changes from that world. That's insanity. That's crazy. And that's why I left. That's why I left.
Well, yeah, you left, I left, many people that are watching left. And, so now that you left Christianity like a few years ago, what are some of the things that you are interested in now? Like some philosophies, are you Buddhism, Taoism? Is there a certain,
No,
no?
I'm of the same religion as Alan Watts. I subscribe to the religion of no religion. So if
Okay.
I am going to be categorized into a religion, it's the religion of no religion. And it's really, there's not a singular philosophy that I subscribe to. So I don't consider myself an Eastern mystic. I
Mm-hmm.
don't consider myself a hermetic individual. I just consider these disciplines that help bring about awareness. It's the
Right.
same thing as saying, hey, there's nothing wrong with learning about Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Eastern mysticism, these things that I've been mentioning. There's nothing wrong with learning about those things. Just don't tie your life into them. But there's nothing wrong with learning about them any more than there's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with loving your neighbor, loving yourself. These are good ideas. There's nothing wrong with that. But you don't have to be a religious person to behave morally. You don't need a religion to have moral values. If you think you need a religion to have moral values, there's a much larger problem in play. And this is a person who's in an identity crisis because they think I have to have a religion in order to obey. You see, that's a person that's an identity crisis. That's a brainwashing issue. When you think that way about yourself, that you don't have it within yourself to do it. And
Mm-hmm.
so my interests now, when you ask, my interest now is just consciousness expansion. Is just learning, trying to study as many different characteristics and aspects of life as possible so that I can learn from each one of them. Because there's some values there in Christianity. There's some values there in Eastern mysticism. There's some values there in Buddhism. There's some values there in atheism. There's some values in all of these things. But don't tie into any of them. Do not commit yourself to any of them because then you're just handing your brain to those people that wrote that religion. Don't give your brain away. Keep your brains and use them to expand yourself, to expand your awareness. As long as you're looking through the binoculars of Christianity, the binoculars of Islam, the binoculars of Buddhism, your world is only as big as those lenses. It will only be as big as the lenses that you're looking through. And you and I both know that's not a good idea. It is
No.
not a good idea to approach the sky and universe and say, okay, the only time I'm ever going to look at the sky is through these binoculars because the only world you're ever going to see is what those binoculars show you. And it's the
Mm-hmm.
same thing with religion. The only world you're going to see is the one that religion shows you. And as long as you insist on looking through those lenses, you will never escape them. That's called anxiety. That's called being captured. I am in a
Mm-hmm.
captured world if I will only look at the world through a small lens. I am captured. And if I'm the one who only looks through that lens, then I'm responsible. You see, the onus is on the individual. No one is going to come save you, in other words. No
No.
hand is going to be held out to you. You must do the work and dig yourself out. I say this all the time in my lectures. You must dig yourself out because no one is coming to save you. No one
Mm-hmm.
is coming to help you. You must help yourself. And by helping yourself, you then can help others. You then can become a light. It's a self responsibility issue. It's a
Mm-hmm.
self responsibility issue at the end of the day. And the self responsible individual will save themselves. They will understand and study their environment. They will learn the trimmings and trappings, and they will then educate themselves so that they can leave that world. And because no one wants a world handed to them. Do you want a world handed to you? No, you want a world that you discover on your own, that you think for
Mhm.
yourself about. You don't want someone to come up to you and you will not go up to someone and say, "Hey, tell me everything I'm supposed to know and I'm not going to believe anything but what you tell me." You see,
That's right.
that's not appropriate. And that's exactly what people do when they go to the pastor. They say, "Tell me everything I need to know. Tell me what verses I need to read. Tell me what scriptures I need to integrate so that then I'm right. I'm then in the right spot." You see, that's crazy. That
Right.
is not why you came to the world. You didn't come to the world to hand your brain off. That is not why you came here. You did not come to give your world to Joseph Smith. You did not come to the world to give your world to give your brain to the Catholic Church. That is not why you came here. You did not come here to give your world to Satanism. That is not why you're here. You came here to consciousness expand. You came here to expand your mind and to experience. And that means don't pigeon yourself into any hole, but allow yourself to bravely, courageously walk into unfamiliar spaces so that you're no longer afraid of them and steered by fear.
Right.
Leave the fear space by walking into the fear space. Stop running from it. Walk right into it. Stop running from the devil as a roaring lion on the earth. Turn around and face these things. Turn
Right.
around and understand these things because you're going to live in fear as long as you're running. You see, it's that's basic psychology right there.
Well, I've lived that my entire Christian life, and I didn't even realize that's what I was in.
Yeah,
And I'm just like, a ton of Christians are living that. They don't really understand, but they're
right.
constantly living in fear, like you shared earlier.
Yeah.
So, Chuck, this has been a great conversation. But one thing I want to
Cool.
ask you before we close this off.
Okay.
So, what's one key idea that you hope to take away for people to take away in this conversation? So, people are going to watch this later, listen to what you have to say. What would be the one key thing you would want for them to take away from this?
I'd want them to self-initiate. I would want them to take what they've heard here, behave responsibility, stop rejecting it, and try and integrate it and seek out and learn. Don't take everything that I've said or that you've said to heart. Take it as perspective. Take it as an interesting idea to consider. Don't be afraid to consider ideas. Don't be afraid to expand past the conclusion that you've drawn or has been put into you, because that's what adults do. Kids just integrate the stuff that's told to them. They don't go out and do the
Mhm.
risky thing. It's the adult that goes out and does the risky thing and thinks for themselves. And so that's what I would want for people to start thinking for themselves. Don't integrate what I've said. Don't integrate what you've said. Don't become a bot. Don't just follow the same way you've always gone. Hey, I found this author. Hey, I found this lecturer. And they got the answers. No, dude, I don't got the answers. You don't got the answers. We just have perspectives. And simply it's that. What you observe and see and those that you resonate with and those books that you like stuff, that's fantastic. But don't make it your world. Expand past that. Always be drawing larger and larger ideas in your mind. Don't conclude down to one thing. Never lock yourself into anxiety like that. Always allow yourself to be free and behave as a free creature, and a free creature thinks freely, thinks for themselves. And that's what I want for folks. When they see my lectures, when they see me in these live broadcasts, I want them thinking for themselves. I want them making their own decisions and to stop just simply integrating and taking the decisions that were put into them. Decide for yourself when you study history. Decide for yourself when you study religions. Decide for yourself when you study medicines, and learn these things at a broad perspective, but never lock yourself into them. Never tie yourself down by them. That would be what I would want for folks, for sure.
Well, that would be in
Thank you,
every part
Joanne,
of
for
it.
the opportunity. Thank you.
Oh, well, I'm just so thrilled that you decided to take the time to come and speak with me, because I really do resonate with your approach and how you
Thank
share
you.
things. Like you said, I don't follow just you, but
Exactly.
I do resonate with how you bring things to the forefront and how you
Yeah.
explain things, because you really bring it to the psychological side of things, where you can get outside of that belief system and go, huh, okay. And like what you
Yeah.
just shared right now, I'm going, okay, am I doing that in other areas of my life? Because as a former Christian, I was in one ditch, found another ditch, and I'm trying to constantly find ditches because of the absolutes. If you're a truth
Yeah.
seeker, and especially the one like I am, the truth seeker wants, okay, is this the truth, the only truth? And
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah,
really,
we We definitely do that. We definitely try to find final answers, and that's normal. I remember when I was leaving Christianity and I was trying to integrate some other religions that would maybe work with it, and I was trying to, just basically form another belief system. And it wasn't until a few years later, this was probably in the mid 2000s, that I was like, you know what? That's actually just jumping into another religion. I'm just jumping into another box, and that's not
Mhm.
wise. I mean, I'm better off standing back from those boxes and looking at them and saying how beautiful they are and how interesting the things that are in them. That's amazing. And I want to integrate that in my life, but these other things I don't resonate with, and go to the next box. And what do I resonate with here? Just like you just did with me. I resonate with some of your stuff, Chuck, and I resonate with other people's stuff. And that is healthy. I encourage that. Please do that. Do not watch only me or any one person or any one book. Watch a ton of people. Have me just be another cog in the wheel, another book that you read, another person that you saw. But I am certainly not a leader, and I'm not trying to start a movement. That's for sure.
Well, that's why when you first started, you were just living out of your experience and you were
Yeah.
sharing what you had lived. And other people have lived what you've lived, but they didn't know how to talk about it. I've lived certain things back in the 2000s, like 2020, and I was by myself. I didn't have anybody. So
Mm-hmm.
you're always looking for people to resonate with. So I'm really
Mm-hmm.
grateful that you took a shot, that you wrote
Yeah.
down or you did videos in respects to that, because it is topics and subjects that people are
Yeah.
looking for. And not everybody is able to articulate, such as yourself,
Mm.
right? So
Yeah. Thank you, Joanne.
you do have a gift to teach.
Thank
And
you.
I recommend
Thank
that
you, Joanne.
everybody check out your channel. I will be posting that
Great.
within the comments section. And
Great.
so Chuck, so
Thank you.
now, so for your next journey, like what are you working on right now?
So right now I just finished the third, let's see, the fifth in my God Eater series, and so I'm breaking from that for one video, and I'm going to be doing a video on all the detoxing therapies that I engaged when I had cancer. I get asked all the time, what did I
Mm,
do when I fought cancer? Like what were the techniques you used? What were the detoxing the techniques that you used? Like what did you do? What doctors did you see? What
mm,
protocols did you follow? Did you follow any protocols? And so I'm just asked that a lot, and I
yeah.
really need to get a video so that when someone asks me that, I could just say, hey, I did a whole video on it. You could just click right here and it'll tell you everything. And that's exactly what I'm doing right now. I'll be walking people through coffee enemas, apple cider vinegar, enzymes and probiotics, Chinese medicine, naturopathy, these kind of things. And so that's what I'm going to be totally diving into in the next video. And I'm excited. I'm really excited about it. It's a totally different subject matter because I've really been tying into the Khazarian mafia, and I've been on that subject matter and Satanism for a while now. And so now I'm just going to take a little break here, get this video out, and then I'm going to go back and finish up my work in the CIA. And then after that, it'll go into soul capture, which is part of the work of religion, and in the soul capture and how the KM set up the societies in the world to not only capture the person in their life right here and now, but to capture them after they die. And so I walk into that, and we're going to be studying that also. So yeah, some exciting things coming up for sure. For sure.
Wonderful. Well, I
Yeah.
do thank you so much for taking the time. And I do hope that in the future, I would love to have another conversation and talk about
Great.
the other topics that you talk about, because I find them
Great.
absolutely fascinating and interesting, as I'm sure
Thanks,
people are going to watch this and say, oh my gosh, I need to follow this guy. And I look forward to
Joanne.
having it again. So
So
thank you so much,
thank you.
Chuck. I really
Thank you,
appreciate
Joanne.
it. Yes. All right.
Thank you so
So
much.
we will see you the next time.
Okay. We'll see you next time. Thank you,
Bye,
Joanne. Bye bye.
everybody.
Bye bye.
Bye.